it's important to step back and analyze the potential plans of the predator class. Specifically, it's important to understand a number of recent government simulations and exercises. First, let's look at the exercise known as Event 201. Event 201 1 year ago, on October 18, 2019, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation partnered with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and the World Economic Forum on a high-level pandemic exercise known as Event 201. Event 201 simulated how the world would respond to a fictional coronavirus pandemic known as CAPS, which swept around the planet. The simulation imagined 65 million people dying, mass lockdowns, quarantines, censorship of alternative viewpoints under the guise of fighting disinformation, and even floated the idea of arresting people who question the pandemic narrative. Coincidentally, one of the players involved with Event 201 was Michael Ryan, the head of the World Health Organization's team responsible for the international containment and treatment of COVID-19. Ryan has called for looking into families to find potentially sick individuals and isolate them from their families. Due to the vast web of connections between Bill Gates and nearly every organization connected to the COVID-19 fight, a growing number of researchers are questioning the motivations of Gates and the other officials involved in the Event 201 exercise.
If we get an airborne pandemic, unlike a slow-moving, disease that's difficult to transmit like Ebola, if we haven't built ahead of time some structures to deal with this, millions of people could be adversely impacted. So number one, you have to start with the premise and believe that multilateral institutions and efforts are important. And you don't have to cede all your sovereignty, or it doesn't make you less patriotic to believe that. You just have to have some sense and read. So that's point number one. Point number two is that, in fact, there are problems with existing multilateral institutions. Not surprisingly, they were designed post-World War II for the most part, and they couldn't have anticipated everything that's happened. There is bureaucracy.
Crimson Contagion and Cladex. Another exercise known as Crimson Contagion simulated an outbreak of a respiratory virus originating from China. August 13 to August 16, 2019, Trump's Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, headed by Alex Azar, partnered with numerous national, state, and local organizations for the exercise. According to the results of the October 2019 draft report, the spread of the novel avian influenza, H7N9, resulted in 110 million infected Americans, 7.7 million hospitalizations, and 586,000 deaths. Another simulation known as Cladex took place on May 2018. This event examined the response to a pandemic resulting from the release of a fictional virus known as Cladex. In the simulation, the virus was released by a terror group called A Brighter Dawn. As the outbreak spread through the United States, the participants asked what would be needed if the president issued a federal quarantine, noting that authorities would need to determine their level of force authorized to maintain quarantine. The Cladex exercise also resulted in the federal government nationalizing the healthcare system. The leaders of these controversial pandemic simulations that took place before the coronavirus crisis have long-standing connections to the U.S. intelligence and the U.S. Department of Defense. Even more troubling is that key players in the exercises, specifically Event 201 and CLADEX, share a common history in another biowarfare simulation known as Dark Winter.
WHO region. We have now more than 8 million probable and confirmed cases and 3 million deaths reported worldwide.
Option 1 prioritizes those with key societal functions in this national crisis, such as government leaders, military, CDC, NIH, healthcare workers, and those making vaccine. Prioritizing healthcare workers and scientists working on the vaccine may increase the overall number of people who can be vaccinated earlier. Prioritizing government officials would ensure continuity of government. Prioritizing critical infrastructure would help ensure the continuing function of essential services. Prioritizing critical infrastructure, however, is not straightforward. There are 16 sectors identified by DHS with tens of millions of people involved. We would have to prioritize within critical infrastructure sectors, which is very difficult. They are all critical.
"20 months into one of the worst pandemics the world's ever known, there's still no vaccine to protect people. Hard figures are impossible to come by, but the World Health Organization estimates that 150 million people have died. That's approximately 2% of the global population. For industrial countries, the death rate's a bit lower, but in many low and middle-income countries, the death rate's much higher. As many as 30% of the seriously ill have died. In the US, there have been an estimated 82 million severe cases and 15 million deaths. At least 5 million CLADEX deaths happened because adequate medical care wasn't available. No doubt, millions of others will have died prematurely from heart attacks, strokes, cancer, and the like. The US, along with the rest of the world, is in its worst economic depression in history. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 90%, the GDP down 50%, and unemployment is running at 20%. Unemployment would be higher if not for the dramatic shrinkage of the available workforce due to death and disability. U.S. healthcare and health insurance systems, as we knew them, have collapsed. Health insurance companies ran out of capital and couldn't pay their bills, leaving hospitals without operating funds. In addition, most medical supplies are unavailable. Half the healthcare workforce has died, become disabled, or quit. The remaining healthcare facilities can't cope with all the patients, and consequently, death rates are soaring, both for CLADEX patients and for everyone else. It was only by nationalizing the healthcare system that basic medical care is still available. The government now pays for, controls, and rations all medical care. The U.S. is in a constitutional crisis. The president remains in critical condition, and while the vice president is out of intensive care, he remains unable to assume his constitutional duties. Therefore, the Speaker of the House is the acting president. Continuity of government is a major concern. 1/3 of the U.S. Congress is dead or incapacitated, as are 2 members of the Supreme Court and senior members of the administration. Government functioning at the federal, state, and local levels has been brought to a near halt. After the failure of the first vaccine that seemed so promising 15 months ago, along with several other candidates, we now see fresh optimism. The Omega vaccine, which has finally been shown to be safe and effective, is just starting to be deployed as fast as it can be manufactured and distributed. 1/3 of Americans are expected to have access to the vaccine in the next 6 to 8 months. Global vaccine distribution and dispensing, which is an enormous undertaking in the best of circumstances, has been slowed in many locations by riots and looting at vaccination sites. Infectious disease specialists seem to agree that once 80% of the people have been vaccinated, the epidemic should be brought under control with an ultimate 20 million deaths in the U.S. These same infectious disease specialists say we're lucky because the virus is similar in some ways to common para-influenza viruses, and only 1 dose of vaccine is needed. The situation in most of the rest of the world is much worse. Massive loss of life, economic collapse, famine, and civil unrest. There's been a mass exodus from cities, adding to the spread of the disease and making vaccination programs even more difficult. The nagging question, what would have happened if we had a vaccine many months earlier? If the first vaccine had worked and started to be deployed at 6 months into the pandemic, the US death toll could have been reduced from an anticipated 20 million to 6 million, with similar reductions in economic and societal consequences. On the other hand, what if years go by without a vaccine? Then, experts tell us that we could eventually see 30 to 40 million deaths in the US and more than 900 million around the world, 12% of the global population. Eventually, once almost everyone's been exposed, the disease will either burn itself out or become endemic, like the dreaded childhood diseases of prior centuries. What the world will look like when it's done is still very uncertain.
Darkest Winter. The Dark Winter exercise took place in June 2001, only months before the 9/11 attacks. This exercise took place at Andrews Air Force Base in Camp Springs, Maryland, and involved several congressmen, a former CIA director, a former FBI director, government insiders and privileged members of the press. The exercise simulated the use of smallpox as a biological weapon against the American public. During the Dark Winter exercise, authorities attempt to stop the spread of dangerous misinformation and unverified cures, just like with the Event 201 simulation. Dark Winter further discusses the suppression and removal of civil liberties, such as the possibility of the president to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow the military to act as law enforcement upon request by a state governor, as well as the possibility of martial rule. The script says martial rule may include, but are not limited to, prohibition of free assembly, national travel ban, quarantine of certain areas, suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, that is arrest without due process, and/or military trials in the event that the court system becomes dysfunctional. What is important to know is Dark Winter was largely written and designed by Tara O'Toole and Thomas Inglesby of the Johns Hopkins Center, along with Randy Larson and Mark Demir of the Analytic Services, ANSWER, Institute for Homeland Security. O'Toole, Inglesby, and Larson were directly involved in the response to the alleged anthrax attacks which took place in the days after September 11, 2001. These individuals personally briefed Vice President Cheney on Dark Winter. Coincidentally, Event 201 was co-hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, which is currently led by Dark Winter co-author Thomas Inglesby. Tara O'Toole was also a key player in the Claydex simulation. The name for the exercise comes from a statement made by Robert Cadillac, a veteran of the George W. Bush administration and a former lobbyist for military intelligence contractors. In the script, Cadillac states that the lack of smallpox vaccines for the U.S. populace means that it could be a very dark winter for America. Cadillac is now leading HHS COVID-19 response and was also involved in the Trump administration's 2019 Crimson Contagion exercises. Eerily, Cadillac's statements in 2001 exercise were recently repeated nearly word for word by Richard Bright, former director of Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. Bright was recently celebrated as a whistleblower who attempted to hold the Trump administration accountable during the COVID-19 battle. However, while speaking in front of Congress, Bright stated, "Without clear planning and implementation of the steps that I and other experts have outlined, 2020 will be darkest winter in modern history." Maybe Bright is simply a concerned scientist warning about the potential for more sick people, but his use of the phrase darkest winter is hard to ignore. When hearing the statements from Cadillac and Bright, we ought to consider the corporate media's promotion of a potential second wave of COVID-19. Bill Gates and other influential pundits and health authorities have consistently warned about a second wave which was slated to arrive in the fall of 2020. As of mid-October 2020, reports are beginning to come in that cases are on the rise. This is what makes the statement from Richard Bright all the more concerning.
Hola brothers and sisters on my YouTube channel. It's May the 10th. Still in lockdown. I've come across this video that came out a few hours ago. It's the South Korean president talking about the second wave that will be coming in Christmas 2020. As this
had with the Korean version of the New Deal, calling it a preemptive investment that's designed to establish digital infrastructure.
비대면 의료 서비스와 온라인 교육, 온라인 거래, 방역과 바이오 산업 등 포스트 코로나 산업 분야에서 강점을 가지고 있습니다. 시스템 반도체, 바이오 헬스, 미래차 등 3대 신성장 산업을 더욱 강력히 육성하여 미래 먹거리를 창출하겠습니다.
Pointing out the economic repercussions of the COVID-19 crisis, Moon also plans to improve the country's social safety net by opening an era of universal employment insurance which everyone can benefit from. He also laid out plans to bolster the country's healthcare system in preparation of a second wave of the outbreak. Moon said the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which has been the COVID-19 control tower, will be upgraded to the Disease Control and Prevention Administration to strengthen its expertise and independence, while he asked for parliamentary cooperation to establish a system for 2 vice ministers within the health ministry.
공공보건의료 체계와 감염병 대응 역량을 유기적으로 강화하여 보다 안전한 대한민국을 만들어 나가겠습니다. 전문가들이 올해 가을 또는 겨울로 예상하는 2차 대유행에 대비하여 매우 시급한 과제입니다.
While vowing to take lead in the International Order of Solidarity and Cooperation, Moon also expressed hopes that Seoul and Pyongyang can move toward a single community of life and peace, although he did not elaborate. Moon said for the remainder of his term he will be devoted in overcoming the national crisis along with the people. He vowed to turn the crisis into an opportunity, stressing that South Korea's goal is taking the lead in the world.
Good evening. We interrupt our regular programming to return to Southwest Medical Center and continuing coverage of the outbreak of a mystery sickness. Earlier today, hospital officials said they were admitting patients with symptoms that seemed to be severe adult chickenpox. But now we have new information. We go to Andy Field outside Southwest Medical Center. Good evening, Andy. What can you tell us?
Sheila, we've been moved to an isolated area behind the hospital, and off the record, doctors here suspect that at least 5 patients hospitalized at Southwest may have smallpox. For those of us who don't remember the disease, it is a deadly virus. We haven't seen it in this country in at least 20 years. Now, if this proves to be true, we could have a very serious health emergency on our hands. But officially, the hospital will not confirm or deny that diagnosis.
And the problem is we don't have enough vaccine to go around.
Meaning we don't have enough vaccine for the United States?
Well, I would like to think that, but we don't have sufficient stockpiles for the people in Oklahoma, Georgia, or Pennsylvania, much less for the entire United States population.
Well, that certainly doesn't sound encouraging. What do you mean exactly?
Angie, it means it could be a very dark winter for America.
Sobering. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Kadlec. We do continue to wait for official reaction to this developing situation. Now we go to a special report on the deadly effects of smallpox that led scientists to launch an eradication program thought to wipe out. On day 6 of the smallpox epidemic, the White House confirmed that federal government officials and military personnel are being vaccinated. 300 people have died. At least 2,000 are infected with smallpox. Smallpox symptoms are being seen in 15 states, also in Canada, Mexico, and England. The U.S. smallpox vaccine supply continues to shrink as officials try to stretch limited stocks to cover the entire nation. An official announcement regarding the remaining vaccine inventory is expected later today. Struggles to get vaccinated led to violence in some cities. Profound economic losses are crippling the nation. In Oklahoma alone, economic experts project severe losses in the state's multi-billion-dollar agricultural commodities market. Still, no group claims responsibility for unleashing the deadly smallpox virus. But NCN has learned that Iraq may have provided the technology behind the attack to terrorist groups based in Afghanistan. We have a breaking story from Oklahoma. We go straight to Andy Fields of Oklahoma City's KMSA. Andy, are you there?
Angie, Texas Governor Rick Parsons has now suspended all surface and air contact between Texas and Oklahoma. He has ordered his state troopers and the National Guard to seal the borders. Now, we're about a mile away from the Texas border here, just near Interstate 35 and the Red River Bridge that connects the two states. The troopers here have taken the media to what they call a so-called safe spot. But as we've told you earlier today, Oklahomans by the carload have been seen leaving the state in every direction trying to escape this deadly smallpox outbreak. Now, we have reports of vigilantes at the Texas border trying to stop people from coming over. I don't know if you just heard that. There was a shot fired. We've heard there's another one. Now, we're not sure where these shots are coming from. We're a little too far away from the border to hear this here, but there have been shots. This is the second time in the hour we've heard this. The National Guard and the Oklahoma State Troopers are here with us. We're not certain who's doing the firing or if what we're hearing is return firing. There's another shot. It's starting to sound like a war zone. I'm Andy Field reporting.
No other country in the world is accepting flights originating in or transiting the U.S. On day 12 of the worst public health crisis in America's history, demonstrations for more vaccine in hard-hit communities disintegrated into riots and looting around the nation. Interstate commerce has stopped in several regions of the nation. A national suspension of trading on America's stock exchanges takes effect tomorrow. International commerce with the U.S. has virtually ceased. The Centers for Disease Control report that efforts to stem the smallpox epidemic have depleted America's inventory of smallpox vaccine. While the CDC may be out of the vaccine, at least 45 internet websites are now offering what they claim are safe, effective vaccines. These claims have not, we repeat, they have not been independently verified. Authorities urge caution. At least 25 states and 10 foreign countries are reporting smallpox infections. At the United Nations temporarily meeting in Geneva, China has sponsored a resolution to censure the U.S., blaming America for reintroducing smallpox to the world. It demands the U.S. supply the world with vaccine. Since the diagnosis of 20 smallpox cases in Oklahoma City 12 days ago, hundreds have now died, thousands have become infected. The latest figures show more than 15,000 new cases in the past week. Officials now question whether a single attack could be responsible for this outbreak pattern developing in the U.S. But they project that each 2 to 3 week period will see a minimum 10-fold increase in new cases.
Again, if you are hearing of these exercises and topics for the first time, please listen with an open mind. I want to emphasize that I do not write these words in hopes of inspiring fear or stress. In fact, I hope that this analysis can paint a clear enough picture of the grim reality we are facing so we may act. It is only by honestly facing our circumstances that we can hope to influence and change the path of humanity. This is a historic time to be alive, and we have the opportunity to play a powerful role. It's time to shake off the shackles and expose those who seek to hold us back for their own sick purposes.
After there, the second one was to find a way of being able to get total control of people's minds. And that would be done by taking hypnotism out of the realm of the occult. They could then use people of great renown, educators, people of capacity, that would do great things, such as supposedly regress people in